Everyone thought it was just another tragedy. A car crash, a grieving father, a closed case. But in the quiet halls of Belridge, whispers began to spread. What really happened to Daniel Harrow, the only son of a billionaire CEO? And why did the autopsy tell a story the father never wanted the world to hear? Before we begin, like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories filled with suspense, shocking twists, and unforgettable lessons. The Harrow estate was the crown jewel of Belridge, a sprawling mansion on a hill, guarded gates, black limousines, the kind of place locals only saw from a distance. Inside lived Charles Harrow, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. He controlled shipping lanes, oil contracts, and entire industries. His name carried weight. His fortune bought silence. But all the wealth in the world couldn't hide what happened on a rainy night in April. That night, sirens pierced the darkness, flashing red and blue lights cut across the slick asphalt of Old Mill Road. A car had skidded off the bend, crashing into a ravine. Behind the wheel was 22-year-old Daniel Harrow, the CEO's only son. The police report said it was simple. He'd been speeding in the rain. He lost control. Another tragic accident. End of story. At least that's what the public was told. At the funeral, Charles Harrow stood, stone-faced by the coffin. His expensive black suit pressed perfectly. His hand rested coldly on the polished wood. Reporters whispered, "He's devastated, but hiding it." Others muttered, "Maybe that's just who he is." Ruthless, even in grief. Beside him, Daniel's mother sobbed quietly. She clutched a silver pendant that had belonged to her son. Charles didn't comfort her. He simply stared at the casket, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. By all appearances, the case was closed. The town mourned, and life moved on. But then came the autopsy report. Dr. Evelyn Clark had worked as a medical examiner for over 20 years. She'd seen everything, from natural deaths to brutal crimes. But when she unzipped the black bag containing Daniel Harrow, something gnawed at her. The injuries didn't match a car crash. Yes, Daniel had cuts, bruises, even broken ribs, but one wound in particular stopped her cold. A fracture at the back of the skull. Clean, precise, the kind that doesn't come from a windshield or an airbag. And then there was something stranger still. His lungs. There was no sign of water from the ravine. If he'd drowned after the crash, she would have found it. But his airways were clear. Daniel hadn't drowned. Daniel hadn't died from the crash at all. Dr. Clark's hands trembled as she wrote her findings. Cause of death. Blunt force trauma prior to the crash. She hesitated. If she filed this, it would mean challenging Charles Harrow, the most powerful man she knew. But the truth was undeniable. Daniel had been dead before his car ever hit the ravine. That night, Dr. Clark's office phone rang. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. "Doctor," the man said, "the Harrow report needs to be finalized immediately. Cause of death. Vehicular accident." Her throat went dry. "That's not accurate," she replied. "The injuries—" The voice cut her off. "Accidents happen. But you wouldn't want to create more problems, would you?" The line went dead. Dr. Clark locked the autopsy file in her desk. She told herself she'd decide what to do in the morning. But when she arrived the next day, the file was gone. Meanwhile, in town, rumors swirled. Some claimed Daniel had argued with his father days before the crash. Others whispered he was planning to expose something about the Harrow empire. At the diner, a waitress leaned in close to a customer. They say Daniel was writing things down in a notebook. Names, dates, deals his father didn't want public. The customer's eyes widened. And now he's dead? The waitress nodded. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Back at the estate, Daniel's mother grew restless. She wasn't convinced it had been an accident either. One night, while Charles was away on business, she entered Daniel's room. His desk was untouched, his books neatly stacked. But inside the bottom drawer, she found it, a leather-bound journal. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. Inside, Daniel had written about secret meetings, hidden bank accounts, and coded messages. The last entry read, "Something is wrong. If anything happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. Start with the man in the shadows. He knows everything." Her stomach turned. Who was the man in the shadows? And why had Daniel feared for his life just days before his death? That night, she confronted Charles. Her voice trembled. Daniel's death. It wasn't an accident. I found his journal. He was scared of someone. Charles's eyes narrowed. You're imagining things, he said. Grief does strange things to the mind. But the journal... He slammed his glass onto the table. Burn it. His tone was final, dangerous. Her hands clutched the journal tighter. She didn't burn it. She hid it. The following morning, Dr. Clark arrived at her office to find a plain envelope on her desk. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Daniel's car, crumpled at the ravine. But in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a shadowy figure standing near the wreck. A tall man in a black coat, watching. Dr. Clark's pulse quickened. She flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in red ink, were 4 chilling words. Accidents don't kill heirs. She froze, the envelope slipping from her hand. Because whoever had sent this knew the truth. The Harrow family's secret was unraveling. The town's whispers were turning into open suspicion. And as the police quietly closed the case as an accident, the evidence told another story, one far more sinister. The CEO claimed his son died in a crash. But the autopsy, and now the photograph, proved otherwise. And the deeper Dr. Clark and Daniel's mother dug, the more dangerous it became. Because in Belridge, some secrets were worth killing for. The camera zooms in on the photograph. The shadowy figure in the corner of the wreck site. The words in red ink. Accidents don't kill heirs. Who was watching that night? And why was Daniel silenced before the crash? The answers would shatter the Harrow empire and put everyone who searched for them in danger. The photograph haunted Dr. Evelyn Clark. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. The crumpled car, the broken glass, and that tall figure in the corner of the frame. Silent. Watching. Accidents don't kill heirs. The words scrawled in red ink were etched into her mind. She knew what it meant. Daniel hadn't just died. He'd been silenced. But by who? At the Harrow estate, Daniel's mother, Margaret, sat alone in her son's room. The journal lay open on her lap, its pages filled with the frantic handwriting of a boy who'd seen too much. April 10th, she whispered, reading aloud. Met with him again. The man in the shadows said father's deals are bigger than anyone knows. Offshore accounts, bribes, something about shipments. If I talk, he said, I won't make it to graduation. Margaret's heart pounded. Daniel had been afraid of someone close, someone inside her husband's world. And now, Daniel was gone. That night, Margaret drove through the rain to meet Dr. Clark in secret. They sat in the dim glow of the examiner's office, the journal between them. This wasn't an accident, Margaret whispered. I know, Dr. Clark replied, and whoever covered this up has power. She slid the photograph across the desk. Margaret gasped when she saw the figure in the shadows. "That's him," she said. "That's the man Daniel was afraid of." "Do you know who it is?" Clark asked. Margaret's voice trembled. "I think I've seen him before. At my husband's office. Always in the background, never introduced, just watching." 2 nights later, Margaret returned home to find her husband waiting in the study. Charles Harrow sat in the leather chair, a glass of scotch in his hand, his eyes cold, unblinking. "Where were you?" he asked. Margaret swallowed hard. "Visiting a friend." Charles smirked. "Strange, because someone told me you've been asking questions about Daniel's death." Her blood ran cold. "You're imagining things." He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't dig, Margaret. Some truths are heavier than you can carry, and if you keep looking, you might end up buried right beside him." At the diner downtown, whispers spread like wildfire. The autopsy was wrong. Daniel didn't die in the crash. They say the police chief met with Harrow the day after, but no one dared say it too loud. In Belridge, Harrow money ran deep, and Harrow enemies didn't last long. The breakthrough came when Marvin, the town's quiet postmaster, approached Dr. Clark. His hands shook as he slid a package across her desk. "I wasn't supposed to deliver this," he whispered. "It was addressed to Daniel." But it came after he died. Inside was a flash drive. On it, a video. Daniel sat in his bedroom, the blinds drawn tight. His voice trembled as he stared into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. I found things in Father's files. Transfers, payments, names. They're working with him, the man in the shadows. He said I was in the way. I don't know how much longer I can hide." The screen flickered. Daniel's face froze mid-sentence. The video ended. Dr. Clark and Margaret sat in stunned silence. Proof. Daniel had known. But before relief could settle in, Margaret's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than a son." Attached was a photo. Not of Daniel, but of Margaret herself, taken through the window of her bedroom, just hours earlier. Her hands shook. Someone was watching her. The following evening, Margaret confronted her husband once more. "I know the truth," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "Daniel didn't die in that car. He was murdered. And you're hiding something." Charles's face darkened. "You don't understand, Margaret. What he found, it wasn't just business. It's bigger than me, bigger than this town. And if you keep going..." His words cut off as the study door creaked open. A tall figure stepped inside. Black coat, gloves, the same silhouette from the photograph. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The man in the shadows stood just feet away, and for the first time, she saw his face. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone she knew. Margaret gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. "You," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man in the shadows smiled faintly, his eyes cold. "It's time you learned the truth," he said. The room went silent, because the Harrow family's darkest secret was no longer hidden in shadows. It had stepped into the light. Margaret's knees nearly buckled as the figure stepped into the light. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded. It wasn't a stranger at all. It was Chief Donovan, the head of Belridge Police, the very man sworn to uphold the law. Margaret's voice trembled. You were at the crash. You were there that night." Donovan's eyes were calm, cold, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. "I warned Daniel," he said, "told him to stay quiet. But he wouldn't listen. Just like his mother." Her hands shook. "You killed my son." Donovan shook his head. I didn't have to. Your husband made the call. I only cleaned up the mess. Charles Harrow rose from his chair, the glass of scotch still in his hand. Enough, he said flatly. Margaret doesn't need to hear this. Margaret's face went pale. You knew. You let this happen. Charles's voice hardened. Daniel found things he wasn't supposed to. If he had exposed them, everything I built, everything we have, would have crumbled. I had no choice. Margaret's tears blurred her vision. You had every choice. He was our son. But Charles's jaw tightened. His silence was louder than words. Dr. Clark, meanwhile, had pieced together the last of the autopsy findings. She knew Daniel had been struck before the crash. She knew the files had been tampered with. And when Marvin, the postmaster, slipped her a second envelope, her suspicions solidified. Inside were photocopies of offshore bank transfers, payments from Harrow Industries, funneled through shell companies, landing in accounts tied to none other than Chief Donovan. It was all there. Dates, amounts, signatures, proof of the partnership, proof of the cover-up. But exposing it wouldn't be easy. Margaret returned to Dr. Clark with the journal, the photograph, and the flash drive. This is everything, she whispered, but if we go public, Charles will crush us. Clark's eyes were firm. Not if we go higher than him. Together, they contacted a federal investigator outside of Belridge, an honest agent who had no ties to Harrow's empire. It was risky, dangerous, but it was the only way. The night the agents arrived in Belridge, the town seemed to hold its breath. Unmarked cars rolled quietly through the streets. Officers not loyal to Donovan slipped into the shadows. And at the Harrow estate, Margaret waited. She had confronted Charles one last time. Tell me it wasn't you, she begged. Tell me you didn't give the order. Charles looked at her with empty eyes. Everything I did was for this family. For you, Margaret shook her head. No, you did it for yourself. And now, you'll answer for it. The sound of boots on gravel grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered against the mansion windows. Charles Harrow's empire had finally come crashing down. The raid was swift. Federal agents stormed the study. Documents were seized, computers taken. Chief Donovan was dragged out in handcuffs, shouting about loyalty, about protection. Charles stood silently as his wrists were bound. For the first time, his polished mask cracked. His shoulders slumped. His empire was gone. Margaret watched from the stairs, Daniel's journal clutched in her hands. Justice had come, but far too late. Weeks later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, townspeople, even former employees who'd feared Harrow for years. The evidence was undeniable. Offshore accounts linking Harrow and Donovan. The autopsy showing Daniel died before the crash. The photograph proving someone was at the scene. And Daniel's own words, recorded on video. The jury didn't hesitate. Chief Donovan was sentenced to life in prison. Charles Harrow, the once untouchable CEO, was convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The empire of Belridge was no more. On the day of sentencing, Margaret sat quietly in the courtroom. Dr. Clark was beside her. Marvin and Mrs. Dawson, the librarian who had first seen Daniel's hidden notes, sat a few rows back. When the judge declared Charles guilty, Margaret felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, grief, anger, emptiness. She looked at her husband, her son's father, as he was led away in chains. He didn't glance at her. He didn't glance at anyone. For Charles Harrow, it was over. Afterward, Margaret returned to Daniel's grave. She placed the silver pendant she had once worn beside his headstone. Her hand lingered on the cool stone, tears blurring her vision. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she whispered. "I should have protected you. But I promise, your truth is out now. They can't bury it anymore." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, Belridge slowly began to heal. The Harrow estate was seized, its gates left open, the mansion abandoned. People no longer whispered in fear. They spoke openly of Daniel's courage, of how one young man's determination had brought down giants. Dr. Clark continued her work, her reputation now marked by the case that changed everything. She had risked her career and her life for the truth, and she would do it again. As for Margaret, she chose not to leave Belridge. She remained in the town that had taken her son, determined to rebuild, to remember him not as a victim, but as a voice that refused to be silenced. The story of Daniel Harrow spread beyond Belridge. Articles, documentaries, headlines across the nation, not just about corruption and power, but about a son who dared to stand against it, about a mother who refused to be intimidated, and about the truth, how it always finds a way to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. Everyone thought Daniel Harrow's death was an accident, but the autopsy, the journal, and the courage of those who refused to stay silent proved otherwise. In the end, the empire of Charles Harrow collapsed, not because of money, not because of rivals, but because of the voice of one young man who refused to let lies be the last word. Justice came, truth prevailed, and in Belridge, the shadows were finally gone.